The first sign was the fence. Not the whole fence, just one panel. It had moved overnight. When I stepped into my backyard at 6:15 that morning with a mug of coffee in my hand, something felt wrong immediately. The yard looked smaller, not by much, just enough to trip something in my head before I understood why. Then I saw it. The rear left fence panel that had always lined up clean with the maple tree was now shifted several feet inward, into my yard. My coffee actually stopped halfway to my mouth. For a few seconds, I just stood there staring, trying to convince myself I was misremembering the angle. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the light was strange. Then I saw the fresh post holes, the disturbed dirt, the new line of bright orange string pulled tight between two stakes, and on the other side of it, standing in gym clothes with a stainless steel tumbler in one hand and the most relaxed smile I had ever wanted to slap off someone's face, was my neighbor, Diane Holloway. She gave me a little wave. "Morning, Aaron," she called. "Looks better, doesn't it?" That was the exact moment I understood this wasn't confusion. This wasn't some contractor mistake. This woman had actually decided to take part of my backyard. What she didn't know, what she absolutely should have known before moving a fence while I slept, was that I had already spent months documenting every weird comment, every HOA note, every fake concern, and every late-night conversation she thought nobody else could hear. She thought she was stealing land. What she was really doing was handing me the final piece of evidence, and by the time she figured that out, the whole neighborhood would know exactly what kind of person had been living next door. My name is Aaron Mercer, and I bought my house in a suburb outside Phoenix, Arizona after my divorce. I didn't buy it because it was my dream home. I bought it because it was quiet. Single-story stucco, decent garage, 2 bedrooms, and a backyard big enough to feel like I could breathe in it. After the divorce, that mattered more than anything. I wanted a place where I didn't have to defend every decision, every hour, every inch of my life. For about 6 months, that's exactly what I had. Then Diane Holloway moved in next door. Diane was in her late 50s, always dressed like she expected to be photographed from the waist up. And she spoke with that low, polished tone certain people use when they think calmness makes them superior. She lived alone, but somehow gave the impression of an entire committee following her around wherever she went. The first time we really talked, I was planting rosemary along the patio line. She leaned over the fence and said, "You know, your yard extends strangely far on this side. That's not a normal thing to say." I looked up and said, "It ends exactly where the survey says it ends." She smiled. "Well, surveys are only as current as the people who care about them." At the time, I thought she was just being odd. Later, I realized that sentence was a warning. Diane became HOA president about 3 months after she moved in. That was bad news for everyone, but especially for me, because by then she had already developed a strange interest in my backyard. Her lot backed up to mine at an angle, and the rear corner of my yard was slightly larger because of the original parcel shape. Nothing dramatic, just an irregular line that gave me a little extra space near the wall. Apparently, Diane had decided that meant the land was wasted. She brought it up for the first time while pretending to discuss landscaping. "You know," she said, standing near the fence with that little thoughtful expression she used when she wanted to sound reasonable, "if that corner were realigned, both properties would flow much better." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so absurd I thought she had to be kidding. She wasn't. "Aaron, I'm serious," she said. "The current fence placement creates imbalance. The current fence placement follows the property line. That's one interpretation. One interpretation of a legal boundary." That was Diane in a sentence. From that point on, the HOA letters started arriving. First it was harmless nonsense, a complaint about stacked pavers by the shed, then one about the color of my patio umbrella, then another saying my rear landscaping interrupted visual continuity. That phrase stuck with me. Visual continuity. Because what Diane meant was she didn't like seeing evidence that the yard was mine. Then came the first letter about the fence. It said the rear fence line might require community review due to emerging lot line concerns. I called the management office immediately. The woman who answered sounded tired before I even finished giving my address. She admitted there was no city survey issue, no formal legal challenge, and no county correction request, just neighbor concerns the board wanted documented. The board, meaning Diane. Of course. That was the day I pulled the original survey packet from my closing file and put it in a fresh folder labeled Fence. That was also the day I ordered cameras. I put one above the back patio, one facing the side yard gate, and one mounted under the eave angled directly toward the rear left corner Diane cared about so much. For the first couple of weeks, the cameras caught nothing but birds, wind, and Diane occasionally lingering too close to the wall while pretending to inspect her bougainvillea. Then I got the first useful clip. At 9:46 p.m. on a Thursday, Diane was standing by the rear wall with a man from the HOA landscaping committee. They had flashlights. They were pointing at the corner of my yard and talking in low voices. The audio wasn't perfect, but one sentence came through cleanly. Diane said, "If he won't agree, we'll normalize the line first." Normalize the line. I sat in bed watching that clip 3 times. She wasn't discussing a survey. She was discussing strategy. That's when I realized this wasn't just one entitled woman with a boundary issue. This was a plan. She wanted to move the physical reality of the yard first, visually, gradually, confidently, so that when it became a fight, it would already feel different. People believe what they see often enough. That was her whole bet. A few days later, little orange marker flags appeared near the back wall. Not official survey flags, just cheap hardware store stakes. I pulled them out and threw them in the trash. The next day, they were back. Only now there was orange string tied between them. I removed that too. Then I called an attorney. Her name was Rachel Boone, and after I sent her the survey, the HOA letter, and the camera clip, she said exactly what I hoped she would. "She's not confused," Rachel said. "She's rehearsing possession." That phrase landed hard. Rehearsing possession. Because that was exactly what it felt like. Like Diane was practicing for a future where my backyard belonged to her. The real escalation came 2 weeks later. I got home from work and found a new row of decorative stones curving into the rear left corner of my yard. Not on the line, inside it, maybe 3 feet. At first, I honestly thought I was losing my mind. I walked the edge twice, compared it to the survey in my phone, looked at the wall, the tree, the sprinkler line. No, I wasn't imagining it. Diane had actually added landscaping into my yard. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. "We're clarifying the shared transition area," she said. "There is no shared transition area." "There is now," she said softly. That line made my skin go cold, because it was said so calmly, not as a threat, as a fact, like reality itself was already moving in her direction, and I was just the last one to catch up. I told her to remove the stones. She smiled. "Maybe this would all be simpler if you accepted the correction." Correction. Everything with Diane was a correction, as if my ownership were just a clerical error she'd graciously volunteered to fix. Rachel sent a demand letter that same night. No trespass, no landscaping changes, no physical modifications to the fence or line, no contact except through counsel. Diane ignored it. And 3 mornings later, I stepped into my yard and found the fence panel moved. The camera footage from that night was unbelievable. At 3:12 a.m., Diane came out with 2 men. One was her handyman. The other was a guy I recognized from the HOA Architectural Committee. They worked quietly, using battery tools and flashlights taped low to avoid throwing too much light over the wall. They removed one fence section, shifted the posts inward, reset the panel, and restrung the line. It took them less than an hour. At 4:07 a.m., Diane stood in my yard, my actual yard, and looked at the finished work with her hands on her hips like she was admiring a home improvement project. Then she said the sentence that buried her. Once it's done, he'll have to fight the new reality. I watched that clip standing in my kitchen with both hands flat on the counter, because if I didn't brace myself, I thought I might actually shake apart. Fight the new reality. That was the whole point. She wanted me exhausted, overwhelmed, late to react. She wanted the physical change first because she believed a changed landscape would make her lie feel solid. Instead, it made her trespass look cinematic. I called the police first, then Rachel, then a licensed surveyor. Not because I needed one, because I wanted fresh measurements, new pins, and a professional witness before Diane could start performing confusion. The officers took one look at the video and asked if I wanted to press the issue. Yes, I said, without hesitation, because people like Diane survive on the hope that everyone else wants peace more than justice. The surveyor was out by noon. His measurements confirmed exactly what I already knew. The fence had been moved 4 feet into my property. 4 feet doesn't sound like much until you watch someone steal it in the dark and then smile at you over coffee in the morning like they've won. Diane still tried to bluff. She told neighbors there had been a boundary correction. She claimed prior surveys had been outdated. She implied I was overreacting to common area alignment concerns, even though there was no common area anywhere near the disputed section. Then she made the fatal mistake. She emailed the HOA board saying, "If we hold firm, he'll adjust to the new footprint." Rachel got that email through Discovery, along with another one where Diane wrote, "Possession changes perception." That became Rachel's favorite sentence. At the hearing, she used it like a hammer. The judge saw the old survey, the new survey, the camera clips, the nighttime fence move, the landscaping intrusion, the board emails, and then the final video of Diane standing in my yard at 4:07 a.m. saying, "Once it's done, he'll have to fight the new reality." Nobody in that courtroom was confused about what had happened. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate trespass, deliberate property interference, and a deliberate attempt to seize land by physically changing the boundary and daring me to keep up. The judge ordered immediate restoration of the fence to its lawful position, prohibited Diane from entering my property again, and awarded damages, survey costs, and attorney's fees. The HOA itself got dragged too, because Diane had used her position to support the theft narrative. She resigned 2 weeks later for personal reasons. Of course she did. That's always how they leave. Never because they were caught. Never because they lied. Just personal reasons. The fence is back where it belongs now. The extra stones are gone. The corner is mine again. But sometimes, early in the morning, when the light hits that section of yard just right, I still remember stepping outside with coffee in my hand and realizing the space looked smaller. That's the horror of people like Diane. They don't just want your silence. They want your ground. How did you like the story? Subscribe to my YouTube channel.